Hello, Life Transformed community.
So now, that's it. Your kids are on your own, and so are you. So what do you do? How do you do it? How do you cope with empty nest syndrome, especially as a single parent?
You know, in this video, we're going to talk about empty nest syndrome and give you some guidelines, some tips on how you can navigate through that process successfully and actually end up thriving.
So I want to just share a little bit about what is empty nest syndrome, right? Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but empty nest syndrome is really that feeling of emptiness, of loss, maybe grief, right? Sadness, confusion, right? And silence and stillness. All those emotions that come up now that your kids are out of the house and life is different, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we can be doing to really, like you said, navigate and walk through successfully and thrive.
You know, it's so interesting about this topic too, and you're gonna see this as we talk, the difference between the male perspective and the female perspective generally. It's gonna play out in this video, and that's what I'm super excited about sharing with people.
So a couple of things to think about, as you're navigating empty nest syndrome, especially as a single parent. One of the things that I was thinking about is, first and foremost, I'm not naive enough to say, well, if I was empty nesting and I had my partner, things would be different. Because you know what? Maybe it would still be really complicated or even more complicated, right? I realized going through a really difficult period with one of my children, there was a moment where I said, oh, if I only had a husband, and I realized wow, but so many people who go through this, their marriages are falling apart because it's so taxing. So first and foremost, as you're empty nesting, as a single parent, don't think that if there was somebody else, it could be better, right? Know that wherever you are, that's your space, and that you can thrive and you can go through it healthy and successfully. But you do need to take some time and pause, right? Because especially, I don't know about you, how it was for me, being a single mom of 2 kids and then empty nesting, I was constantly run, because I work full time, I have the kids. And one of my children especially was very, very difficult. And so the launch was almost devastating. And so I realized that now they were gone. And so even though I had been working on myself throughout the whole process, there was this whole other level of emotions that I had to confront, that maybe I was able to sort of put off because when they were around, I had to really focus more on them than my own self, but that wasn't the case. So one of the things I think that's really important as you're empty nesting is to work on yourself and to take that time to pause and reflect and honor everything that you've just been through, and seek out the good, remember the good, and then find out who you are.
Boy, so good. And from my perspective, I love what you said there. And I would say, Maida, if you're someone that is almost to the empty nest portion of your life, what you said, work on yourself, that starts now. That starts now. The sooner that you can work on yourself, the sooner that you can, right, make sure your identity isn't wrapped up in being a dad or a mom. Because the more your identity is wrapped up in that, the harder it's going to be when that launch point occurs.
Absolutely.
I think back, to me, and I think this is more of a guy-gal thing. As a guy, I was always, my dad raised me to be independent, and you can do it, you're on your own. So that was what I thought, I needed to do for my son, was to do that and make sure that he's independent, and I'm imagining life without him and that he's thriving. Totally different perspective. My wife, my first wife at the time, she was exactly the opposite. I'm working corporate life and she's at home. That is her job, to raise this son, this little boy. So her whole identity was wrapped up in that. So you can imagine, you think about when the empty nest occurred, totally different perspective. on what was going on. So I love what you said there about work on yourself.
Yeah, well, and even because I did both, right? I cared and raised them, and I worked, right? So there was still a place where my full identity wasn't wrapped up in my children, but when they were gone, I realized that it was still different. Even though I was walking in my purpose, I realized how much having that structure of the kids helped to move things forward. And when that was gone, there was a period of like free falling, like, what is this, right? So it can be challenging even when your whole identity isn't wrapped up in your children.
Right.
Because it is a new chapter, right? It's something different, right? Because you still always have something about them going on, but then you don't have to worry, did they wake up today, right? Whatever that is. And so it just feels weird.
Yeah, it brings me right back to community again. I mean, that's why we're doing this. That's why Life Transformed is, God called us to put this whole thing together, because as we can share, you can share your unique experiences. I can share my unique experience. There's somebody out there watching this video that is where I was, is where you were as well. So if we can speak, our experience into you and our truth into you.
Where you talked about even before you get into empty nesting, right? And how to start working on yourself in that moment. So the more you can start to normalize, right? And recognize like, hey, this might come up as I'm empty nesting. Because when we haven't normalized, when we don't expect it, that's, I think, when life becomes more challenging, right? It's when something just bam hits you in the face and you weren't expecting it, even though it's a normal part of the process. If you don't think it's normal, then you think, is there something wrong with me? Or you don't know how to handle it, right? So if you can connect yourself with a community of people who are maybe a stage or two ahead, right? Who've been through it and, oh, you know what? Everybody goes through it. I think that's really important.
Yeah. So I just want to talk a little bit about how to get over empty nest. If you are in that space where you're going back and forth and you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do now? And I'm missing and all of that stuff. Get tied into a community as soon as you can. Talk about it with those people that are for you, that don't judge you, that are in harmony with you. The sooner you can get plugged into that community, the quicker you're going to get through that whole empty nest syndrome that we hear about. And from my perspective is, if you give that empty nest syndrome life, it will take over your life. If you say, yes, okay, I know I'm experiencing that right now, but you shift your mind, right? You shift your mind to, and I'm going to be through it quickly because I've got a supporting community around me. I mean, to me, that is the number one tip I would give people.
No, absolutely. The community is essential, and recognizing, like you said, you are in a new chapter, right? Validate your feelings, right? Don't just pretend that they don't exist. Validate them and say, and yes, I can move forward. Life is different now, right? And also just, you know what? I realized that there's no one way to empty nest, the right way to empty nest. We all empty nest differently, right? So how do I cope with empty nesting? Well, that's going to look like what it needs to look like for you, and it's going to be different for me, and it's going to be different for somebody down the street, right? The other thing that I think is really important, one of the things that we didn't even talk about is oftentimes when we're empty nesting, especially early on, it's I miss my kids, right? And so we want to call them, we want to text them, why aren't they responding? We need to give them their space too. We need our space and they need their space. And I think that is one thing that is crucial. The sooner we can get to that place where we give our children their space to really spread their wings, because you said it earlier, really our role as a parent is to launch them to be independent and successful or interdependent more than anything. But we can't do that if we continue to hover over them.
Amen.
Right? So giving your kids their space to grow so you can grow too.
Absolutely.
So we hope that we provided you guys something of value today. And if we did, don't forget to click the bell, subscribe, share.
We will see you next time on the journey from isolation to community, where freedom awaits beyond.